Excellent. Welcome, everyone. I'm very happy to be with you today for this session. I'm always honored when the Acumatica team, and especially Mark, ask me to present at this conference. And for this year, I wanted to challenge myself a bit and try something new. So I decided to prepare a session around continuous integration and continuous delivery with Acumatica. Actually, a good way to call this session could be deploying your Acumatica applications with confidence. If you're not familiar with the concept of CI/CD, so CI stands for continuous integration, CD for continuous delivery, you will be by the end of this presentation. Before we start, I just want to introduce myself. I've been part of the Acumatica community since 2009, and this very, very small family of enthusiastic partners and developers has grown into a huge family. And I'm sure there's a lot of people on the call today who are attending their first virtual developer conference or maybe their first Acumatica webinar. So I want to make sure that I properly introduce myself. So I was talking about this very small family. I have a picture on my screen now from the very first Acumatica Summit. That was back in 2011. And looking at the number of attendees on this call, I believe there's like 10 times more people on this single webinar than there were at the entire, at the full Acumatica Summit 10 years ago. I am with a company called Velixo. It's a company that I started in 2017. Before that, oops, sorry. Good, perfect. I was struggling changing the slides. Yeah, so before that, I was with Acumatica as part of the product management team. I helped start the Canadian office of Acumatica in Montreal. So this is where my funny accent comes from. I'm from the French-Canadian part of Canada. Velixo is what I'm focused on today. Velixo brings the power of Acumatica to Excel. I built this from scratch. Initially, it was me coding, selling, supporting, and managing, but now we have a full team that's working on this product. Velixo is keeping me very busy, but I'm also trying to stay involved in the Acumatica community. So I just want to give a quick shout out to Team Rodman, who's working with me on a monthly webinar that we do called Excel Talk. So we basically ask people to call the number that you see on the screen, 833 Excel Talk. They leave a message, anything related to Excel, whether it's Acumatica related or not. And then once a month we get together. It's something that we do live, it's unrehearsed, and we take questions. It can be simple questions, tough questions, and we have a lot of fun together. We'll be taking a short break over the summer, but I want to invite you, if you see Excel Talk on YouTube or online on the different Acumatica forums, make sure to tune in once in a while. We have a lot of fun, and it's one of the ways I try to stay involved in this community. So once again, today we will be discussing CI/CD, continuous integration and delivery, and we're even going to attempt like a full continuous delivery scenario using Acumatica and a few different tools that I will be showing you during this presentation. When I last did this session, it was live, so I had an audience in front of me and I started with a show of hands. I think we can still do that even though we're on Ring Central meeting. So maybe just use the chat window and just type yes, no. I'm just curious. I would like to know if everyone here uses a source control system for your Acumatica customizations or projects. So if you do, like, just raise your hand in front of your webcam, just type yes. Pretty good. I'm even seeing answers in some strange languages. So I assume this means yes, hopefully. If you are not using source control management, I would like you to leave this session now. Please start using one. I think I will have accomplished my mission for today. Before you can attempt CI/CD, you will need to have source control management in place. I will be covering that today in this session. I will be showing you how I set up my projects. I have a full project that I will be sharing with you. So it's on GitHub. You can access it. You can copy it and try to do the same thing with your own Acumatica projects. I know it's not totally obvious how to do this with Acumatica customizations, so I will be going through that in my presentation. I will have a few links as well that I will be sharing towards the end of my session that you will find very useful if you want to know more about source control management, automating the build process, and using the different test tools that Acumatica provides. I have one more question for you. have you heard of the different testing frameworks and tools provided by Acumatica? So there's one for unit testing and another one for UI testing. So if that's something that you are using, I would like to hear about that as well. Again, just use the chat window. Just say, yes, we're using what we're using. This is all, yeah, Dimitri, I just saw your yes. Obviously, you are at Acumatica. Robert as well. I just want to mention Robert Waite. He's an Acumatica MVP. I used some of the videos and content that you wrote online to prepare for this session, so that was very helpful. Very happy to know that there's quite a few people actually using this. As far as I know, this is now a requirement for ISVs that provide solutions that are Acumatica certified. Acumatica does require you to provide a set of tests that Acumatica can run to verify that your solution works with newer versions of Acumatica. So even before Acumatica releases a new version, they are able of running a full set of tests to confirm that your customization, your integration will keep working. Okay, so you do that by using the same testing tools that Acumatica uses. Before we get into what I really like, which is coding, I would like to explain continuous integration and how that relates to traditional software development practices. In traditional software development, the process of integration generally takes place at the end of the project after each person has completed their work. This process generally takes days or even weeks and can be quite painful. You can have conflicts because two developers modify the same bit of code. You might have code that no longer compiles. Maybe like somebody changed something and never actually verified that this code still compiles. Things that were working previously and that no longer work, missing dependencies and so on. Or actually maybe it works, but just not in the customer's environment. I think we've all said, oh, like it works on my machine, right? So what I want to show you today are ways to make that easier, to make sure that you have a product that you can ship today and that you have a repeatable process that is automated and that scales as well. So we solve that using continuous integration, so which is the first part of my presentation today. CI is a practice that puts the integration phase earlier in the development cycle so that building, testing, and integrating code happens on a more regular basis. Actually, I would say multiple times a day if possible. CI means that one developer, let's call him Steve for my example, who writes code on his laptop at home, and another dev that we will call Annie, who codes on her desktop in the office, can both write software for the same product separately and integrate their changes together in a place called the source repository. So that was my question earlier. Like if you're not using that, this is a requirement. You need a centralized place where your code can be checked in or committed. File share is not the right solution because a file share does not track revisions. There's no control if two people try to make the same changes at the same time. And actually, in many cases, if two people try to open the same file, Windows will simply let you know that the file is read-only. So you cannot do actual teamwork on a file share. Believe me, like this is still commonplace. I've seen this not too long ago at small software shops. Like people like try to use a file system without the proper source control management solution. So again, like this is the key thing I want everyone to forget. If you're not doing this today with Acumatica, that should be your first step. So the source repository allows us to build the combined software from all the bits that were contributed by Steve and Annie, and then make sure that everything can get tested and works the way that we expect. To make this happen, we generally use a tool called the CI server to do this building and integration. The CI requires that we have self-testing code. And this is a set of code or source code that tests itself to ensure that it is working as expected. And these tests are either UI tests or unit tests. When all the unit tests pass after the code is integrated, we get a green build. This indicates that we have verified the changes, successfully integrated these changes, and that everything is working as expected. It's not yet production ready because it has not been verified in production-like environments, but this is one of the steps that we'll be working on later on. The benefit of CI is that integration becomes a non-event. Software is written and integrated all the time. Before CI, integration happened at the end of the creation process, all at once, and took an unknown amount of time. It could be a day, a week, a month, or maybe it could never work. I've heard about cases like that as well. Now with CI, this happens every day. It takes minutes, and it becomes just the way you work. The second piece of the puzzle is called continuous delivery. So it's C or CD. Let's continue with my earlier example involving Steve and Annie. CD means that each time Steve and Annie makes change to the code, integrates and builds the code, they also automatically test this code on environments that are very similar to production. We call this progression of deploying to and testing on different environments a deployment pipeline. Deployment pipelines often have multiple stages. These stages can vary by team, production, product, or organization. For example, at Velixo, we have a development environment, a staging environment, and a production environment. In each environment that we have, our code is tested differently. This gives us more time and more confidence that the code will work in the final production environment when the code is deployed there. Crucially, the code is only promoted to be tested on the next environment in the deployment pipeline if it passes the test of the previous environment. This way, we get feedback from the test in each environment, and if there is a failure, we can understand more easily where the issue is and how to fix it before the code gets into production. As an Acumatica, Okay, so now we're getting close to the exciting portion of my presentation, which is coding. This is what I like to do. Usually I have a very small set of slides in my presentation, but this one included more content, so I spent time building a good detailed slide deck that you could also refer to later on. First of all, I mentioned source control. I said this is the most important thing and that this is a requirement if you want to do CI/CD with Acumatica. In my case, I use GitHub. GitHub is an online Git repository, and you can create your own repositories at no cost. It used to be that your repositories had to be public, but since GitHub was acquired by Microsoft, you can now create private repos at no cost. See, cost is not even an excuse for not using a source control system. You can, by the way, host Git internally with your own Git server, but I just find it convenient to have everything hosted. And this also happens to be the solution that we use at Velixo for our source code. I also set up an Acumatica test instance. If you want to do automated testing, you will ideally need to test on something other than your production environment, obviously. Otherwise, if everything fails, you will have 200 users running at your desk and just screaming at you for the changes that you just pushed to production. You need at least one instance, which is what I set up in my case, but in real life, you might want to have multiple stages in your delivery pipeline, like staging, development, production. You might also want to test on multiple Acumatica versions at once. So if you have a product that targets and supports Acumatica 2022, 2021, 2021 R2, and so on, you might have different VMs, different stages in your pipeline that will test each change against all the different versions of Acumatica that you support. By the way, this could all be running off the same machine. You don't need multiple VMs for that. It is very well possible to set up multiple app domains, multiple app instances from a single server using IIS. The third item is Azure pipelines. This is the CI server that I used for my presentation. This is not the only CI server out there. GitHub has its own CI called GitHub Actions. I was simply more familiar with pipelines, so this is what I used. By the way, there's a free tier for Azure pipelines, so you can use it for one project with a lot of CPU time, and you will not have to pay a single cent for it. Next, and this is actually ended up not being necessary for my project, but I will still mention it because it might be necessary in your case. I set up what is called a build agent locally on my virtual machine. This is because I was expecting that I would need to deploy additional tools on the build machine to run Acumatica UI tests. Azure provides you with standard build agents that are running a recent version of Windows Server. But if you need to install additional software, let's say in my case, I need to test my product on Excel, well, I would have to do that on my own VM because the VMs that Microsoft provides on Azure pipelines do not include Excel and they do not include custom proprietary solution. But again, as far as I know, this is not a strict requirement. I was able to complete everything for this presentation without having to use my local build agent. Next item is MS Tests. This is a test framework that I used. This is one of the many testing frameworks available in the .NET world. There's NUnit, XUnit as well. I think they all have their pros and cons. And my goal today is not to explain which one you should use or why. I think they're mostly equivalent, and they will all work well within an Azure pipeline. Then we have the Acumatica test framework and the unit test libraries. I'll be showing you more of that in a few minutes. And last but not least, some duct tape that was really important in getting this to the finish line. Let's continue and take a look at the GitHub repository structure. What you see on the left side of my screen is a screenshot of the GitHub repository structure. By the way, the URL is on the screen here in blue, so you can actually open it right away in a separate window if you want to take a look at it on your machine. The first folder here is my Acumatica extension library. This is a simple C# library. It's an Acumatica class library, and it contains 2 graph extensions, which are packaged as part of a standard .NET DLL. Next is the customization folder. This is the actual Acumatica customization project. This folder contains all the artifacts that are not part of the Visual Studio solution. For example, if you add a field in the invoices screen, this will be in an XML file. If you add a database field, this will be another XML file. When you use the Acumatica source control integration that is built into customization tools, it will spit out a folder with a set of XML files that I store in my GitHub repository. This is also important, and as we progress towards a working solution, I will show you more of that from the Acumatica user interface. Next is a little folder called Customization Package Tools. This is part of the duct tape I was talking about. It's a set of command line tools that I had to build to make this a reality. Libs, so a set of dependencies, mainly Acumatica libraries that cannot be added through NuGet. This was needed for the unit test and the UI test that are run through my pipeline. I wish I did not have to bundle this into a GitHub repo, but unfortunately this was required to complete my project. And then you have my 2 testing projects. One is for UI testing, the other one for unit testing. Initially, I wanted to use .NET Core. So I told you I wanted to challenge myself. So instead of doing traditional .NET 4.8 or 4.7, I said, okay, let's use .NET Core. But it turns out that I never got it to work with the Acumatica unit test library. For UI testing, it worked fine. It's very simple. But ultimately, I just decided to keep both of my test projects separate. Azure pipelines.yml. So this is my build definition. We'll take a look at this file later. This describes what should happen whenever you push code to your repository. So these are all the actions, compilation, testing, deployment, like send flowers to your mom and thank your developer that you want to happen as part of your build process. I also have 2 PowerShell scripts simply to build and publish customizations. So these are simply fancy batch files. It just so happens that it's far easier to run PowerShell scripts from Azure pipelines than a batch file, but in reality, it's just a 1-line file that calls the tools that we built as part of the duct tape portion of my presentation. Lastly, I just want to mention that there's a NuGet.config file. This is how I'm telling Visual Studio where to pull the dependencies for the test framework. The Acumatica test framework requires a few NuGet packages, which are not published on any public repository. I made this suggestion to Acumatica in the past that this should be public, so it would remove the requirement to modify the NuGet config and have your own NuGet server. In my case, this is what I had to do to get it working. I struggled a lot initially. And again, I want to thank Robert for the great video that he created around the Acumatica UI test. Robert, if you're still listening, I would love if you could paste a link to your video. If not, I know it will be somewhere towards the end, but this is really something that helped me when I first built this session. I told you we would be spending more time looking at source control integration. I think it's important because I've been stating since the beginning of my presentation that this is key to CI/CD. And even if you don't want to set up a full CI/CD workflow yet, well, you might want to at least have source control integration with your Acumatica customizations. In your customization projects, you will see that source control menu item. And when you first see it, you might think, wow, like Acumatica is integrated with Git or with Subversion. Well, it's not, okay? It says source control integration, but all it does is read and write your customization to a local project. Keep in mind that this folder is always on the same machine as where your Acumatica system is running. So if you're working off a remote instance, you need a way to access the file system. When you use the source control menu to save your customization to a folder, it takes all the artifacts, all the things that you see in the left-hand side of your customization project and spits out one XML file for each. Actually, I think it's worth at this point to look at a customization project and how the source control integration will actually generate these files. So let me exit PowerPoint and go to my environment and just access a customization project. So if I export my project here, you'll see that what you get is a zip file. So zip files do not work very well with source control system. You could add a zip file, but you will have no way to merge changes from multiple developers. You will have no way to compare revisions of your code. Also, it's not very efficient storage-wise to work with binary files. If you open the zip file, you'll see that you have a bin folder. So it contains the libraries, and then a project.xml file. And this project.xml file is actually one big, let's see if I can open that here. It's one big XML file that contains everything in your customization. So in my case here, it's actually quite small. Sorry if it's just one big line. But as you can see, it's one XML file. So again, not very convenient for collaboration. If you use a source control system instead, and I'll open my project and select source control and save project, it will save all the artifacts, all the different elements in your project to one folder. And this folder is what you will store in your GitHub or your SVN or whatever source control system that you use. I have it here for my solution. So you do have the project folder and then one file per item. Okay, just to show you a more complete project, I will open what we have at Vilixo here. We have tools. That's my customization. And there we have a bunch of files, all the generic inquiries. They're all stored as separate files. So this means that you can effectively look at each file separately. You can see who changed what, when. Let's take, for example, this account. Not this account, this generic inquiry. I can right click and, oh, this one is not version. Let's take this one here, show log. I can open that and I can see the change log. So I can see a description, who changed it. Turns out it's me, when it was changed, and you could see all the revisions for a file. I think I just highlighted that, but I want to state it once more. Beside the ability to collaborate with others, one of the most important reasons you want to use source control management is revision tracking, knowing who changed what and why. I clicked on a file and you saw the change log and you saw that it was just my name. So I like to use source control management even as a single developer on one project, because 2 years from now, 5 years from now, and even like in one project that I'm still supporting, like 15 years later, I can still see all the changes that I made with a description. So that can tell me, oh, like this is why I changed this and what was the code before. So it's very easy to go back. There's also something very useful in Git called blame, the git blame function. So it annotates every line of code and tells you who is to blame for a change. So it's very, very easy. You know something broke in that file, you just run git blame, you scroll through, and then you have the name of each person who changed which part of the code. Actually, let me do a git blame on something here. Let's pick, let's say, add-in.cs here, blame, and you'll see what I mean. So on the right, I have my source code. On the left, I see the change number and the developer. So if I click on this one, on the right-hand side, I will have a description, and 1963 is a reference to our internal bug management system in this case. So you can quickly scroll through an entire project, just one file, and see who changed what, and then you can access the change and compare with the previous revision very, very easily. So once again, it's helpful. If you're not doing that today, you should do it, even if you are the only developer working on that particular project. Once you have all the artifacts in Git, you need something to create or build a customization package. So I'm talking about that zip file that I showed you earlier. This will be needed before we can run our automated test on the project. Acumatica ships with a command line app called px.commandline.exe. If you read the documentation, they will tell you that this is how you build a customization project from source control. I tried very hard to use it. I tried a year ago at Velixo for another project, and I ended up giving up for multiple reasons. First of all, this tool requires a full local Acumatica instance, and I don't have one running on the Azure build server. Also, it's very slow. It seems to spin up a real Acumatica instance, so that takes minutes before it runs. And finally, for some reason, it does not appear to work from a limited user account or service account. Is there an alternative? The answer is yes, I built one for you. But before I explain how to use it, I just want to remind you of what's included in the customization package. So right here at the top, on the top portion of my slide, you see all the different elements included in the zip file, the XML, the bin, and all the additional artifacts. The command line tool that I built for you simply expects the path of this customization package and the zip file of the package that you want to build. So it's very, very quick, simple, and I'm providing that for you as well. It's on the GitHub repository that I shared earlier. You will be able to use that for your own projects free of charge. Next is publishing. So remember that we want to be testing on our real-life environment. So once we have the project, we need to publish it. Acumatica provides an API for that. I decided to extend my command line wrapper, the same one I was just mentioning, to allow publishing a customization project from command line. Azure pipelines cannot call the SOAP API directly in Acumatica, so it becomes very easy using this tool and my PowerShell script to actually publish the package. You can see here how I invoke this command line. So it's publish, my zip file, the name of the package, the URL, and credentials that I need to use. Once your customization project is published, it's now time to run your test. Acumatica provides two different testing frameworks, one for unit testing, the other for user interface testing. The Acumatica UI test framework, which is probably the most commonly used, or at least the most well-known testing solution in the Acumatica world, is built on top of Selenium. I'm sure this is familiar to many of you on the call today. Acumatica created a very fancy layer on top of it with wrappers that are automatically generated for all the standard Acumatica screens. I hope it's big enough for you on the slide, but you can see a simple UI test that opens the customer screen, it clicks the first button, and then it clicks the send fax button, which is part of the customization project that I built as part of my project. So it's a very simple, actually, the dummy customization. You click on the button, and it changes the fax number of the default contact to who still uses a fax, okay? So I'm just verifying through my test that this is still the value that we see after this customization has been modified. We also have unit test. So this runs the testing without actually invoking the UI. This works very differently than UI test because it works by testing very, very specific layers of code. So you would focus on a very specific class. Let's say you have a graph extension. You want to test the behavior of that graph extension instead of the entire product UI. On my side, I found it a lot harder to get this to work. And I would like to thank Dimitri Naumov from Acumatica for all his help to get things working. Fortunately, there is now a dedicated course on the Acumatica University that covers unit testing. It may help you to go through it if you want to do unit testing. At Velixa, we mainly use unit tests to test our application. We have several thousands of tests in the app, and in about 30 minutes, we can go through the entire test suite. If you were just using UI test, it would be taking a full day to go through all these tests. So I wanted to illustrate both testing techniques, and in the GitHub repository that I shared, you'll see that you have an example of both tests, both the UI and the unit test. And last slide before we actually open Visual Studio and make some actual coding and changes. This is the Azure pipeline YAML file. So this is my build script, if you want, that tells Azure when it should be triggered, what should be done. So you should do a NuGet installation, you should restore the packages, you should compile, you should run the UI test, you should run the unit test, and so on. So this is part of Azure pipelines. If you work with GitHub Actions, it will be different. But this is, your build script, the build and testing script. Okay, let's try it out. Mark, I just want to check how we are doing on time. If you're around, I would appreciate if you can tell me.
I'm here.
Yes.
So you still got plenty of time. You are scheduled, and you can, let's see, so you're scheduled to end at 10 after the hour.
Okay, perfect. I thought I had like 10 minutes left, so I started speeding some of my content. Good, perfect. So I will be able to have a more relaxed space for this next portion. Actually, I will be explaining the testing tools again, because I do have that in the solution right now that I have open here. So let's just take a look at my Visual Studio solution. I will expand that here. This is the same project that I had on my slide earlier. So it contains the Acumatica extension library with my send fax graph extension. Okay, so it adds an action button. When you click on it, it changes the fax to who still uses a fax. So pretty simple Acumatica customization. Anyone here that's doing Acumatica development should recognize this type of code. I have a second customization. It's a graph extension on sales order entry. It's an additional validation that will check if we have a customer order number when the order total is greater than the amount that we have here. So above $1,000, it will tell you that the customer order number is required for such orders. So let's open Acumatica just to verify that both customizations work. First, let's go to the customer maintenance. So this is the time where I should have some background music playing. Acumatica is thinking and loading. There we go. I was about to pick up my iPhone and start Spotify. Okay, let's zoom out a bit here. Okay, let's take another client here. USA Bartending School. And I will click the send fax button. And as soon as I do that, you'll see that the fax number changes. Actually, I would like to know if anyone here is still using a fax. Okay, so that works. And then let's check the second customization, the one that is on the sales order entry screen. I will create a new sales order. here. So notice that the customer order number is blank right now. So first I will add this line at 999, oops, actually it's at 10,000 already. So you can see that the customer order number is required. And if I create another order, but this time make the amount smaller, it's not going to trigger. So these are the two customizations I have in place in this project. And these customizations are included as part of a class library that is built and included in this customization project that I have here. You could actually have the code hosted directly in the customization project, but I wanted to highlight the process of building this zip file that also contains a binary. Some developers prefer, actually I do prefer having class libraries for production projects that involve a large number of screens and custom code because it's simpler for me to manage and build. But I really wanted to highlight that you can have a DLL, that it will be packaged, and that you can publish it and test it. So the only other artifact in my customization project for this particular demo is the screen customization. There's a small change here that was made just to add an extra file to include. Okay, so now I have my two test projects. I will skip over the customization tools. This is what I built to build a zip file and publish a zip file. You can take a look at the code. It's on the GitHub repo. We will just be using it today. Next, I have my UI test and my unit test. For the UI test, I built two tests. One that will check the send fax button. It's very simple. It creates an instance of customer. It calls open screen, the first move first, and then the send fax button. Okay, so you'll see that if I just type here, second, I'm struggling with focus. Yeah, it's completely unresponsive right now. Okay, well, I don't know what I did, but am I able to modify? Yeah, okay. No, backspace doesn't work. So if anyone knows what I did wrong, it could be this thing here. No, no. Every other key works, but not backspace. Well, okay, let's try to code without backspace today. So if I do customer dot, you'll see all the actions, all the views, all the fields. So I do have customer dot customer details. I have default contact, and then I have phone one label. This matches the UI screen layout. So it's very, very easy as you're writing your test to understand where to find something. Okay, so in the customer screen, I have the summary section, I have the general tab, I have my default contact, phone one, phone two. So the information is structured pretty much like it is on the screen. In the Acumatica test framework documentation, it talks about using a command line test runner. I'm not quite sure how you could use that as part of an Azure build pipeline. In my case, I wanted to use MS test with the standard test class and test method attributes. So I had to do some digging around and even some reverse engineering to figure out how the test runner works. And in the end, I was able to actually set up tests that will work using the standard MS test layout and format. Okay, so I just created this UI test base class that you can use. I will just go to it, go to definition. So it does a few things. I added some comments here to explain how I initialize it. But at the end of the day, when I'm writing a UI test, I just create a test class, test method, and the system will invoke all of these tests. So let's run this UI test. It will actually show it live. I will right click and select run. So you will see that it compiles my code. And then it will start the test. It takes a few seconds to start. All good. Browser is open. It logs in. Then it will open the customer screen. And it will click the send fax button. Well, actually, it does a few other things as well. All good. So 12 seconds, it ran through all the tests. You can see that we have a green check mark. Later on, when we make changes to the code and push them to GitHub, our Azure CI pipeline will run the same test. So if my colleague makes a change to the code and breaks something, Azure will just send a big warning. Hey, like your new branch contains a bug, something is not right. My unit tests are also executed using MS tests. So the unit tests are different. You saw them earlier with in my slide. So there's a lot more code, but actually the benefit of unit tests is that they scale much better. You could run hundreds, if not thousands of unit tests very quickly. It will not start the UI, and it works by directly invoking the code and testing the very specific layers that you want to test. So I have a very simple sample here. I called the send fax button, and I verified that the fax number is who still uses a fax. Let's run it. The startup time is a bit longer from what I remember for unit test, but once everything is fired up, it would run much faster than unit test. Let's wait. Last time it took 30 seconds, so now that should be about the same. And once this is done, we will try to make a change to our code, okay? And we will push it to Git and see what happens with my pipeline. Let's close all the windows. I want to get ready with that. Still running. All good. So you can see the second test took just 1 second. It's very fast once it's initialized. It just takes a while to initialize. So at this point, all our tests are good. So if you don't have CI/CD, like Azure pipelines, you would at least be able to test your own code locally. But now I want to show you the full pipeline, the full life cycle. So let's go ahead and let's say I'm a new developer and I receive this request and I start working here and somebody tells me, oh, like you have to change this here and there's a typo, can you change it here? And you know, by accident, I'm a new developer, I'm not careful and I change this number here and I push this code out. Okay, so if you don't have unit tests, you will not catch that. If you don't have a CI/CD server, you will not even know if the code still compiles unless I try it. So it's often like where people will add new classes and they will forget to add it to the solution. So you don't really know if it's working. That's why I said you want to do integration continuously. So you want this to become a non-event. You want your code to be tested at all times. So let me show you what would happen if I, as a developer, commits this code to my source repository. So I will just go to my CI demo and hit commit. And I have set up permissions in my GitHub repository. I'm actually not allowed to commit code to the main branch. This is because I only want code that has been tested and verified to be committed or pushed to this branch. So instead I will create a new branch, demo conference. Okay, make some changes. I'm a newbie and don't know what I'm doing. So I will commit this. So you can see that, you know, I'm actually able to compare and look at the changes. Again, one more benefit of source control, but again, I'm a newbie, so I don't really know what I'm changing. And I don't realize that I just changed a validation rule by accident. So let's push this. So now the code is in my repo, and I just need to create a pull request to have my code reviewed and tested. So let's create the pull request. And now you can see that I'm not allowed to merge and that some checks have not completed yet. So this is my CI pipeline. And let's open the pipeline right away to look at what's happening. You can see there's a new run here and it's automated. I set up Azure to run the pipeline whenever there's a pull request targeting the main branch. You could set this up differently. You could have the test run always on every push of every branch. At Velixo, we just decided to have the quick test run, you know, at all times, and the longer test, they only run when you actually have a full pull request that you want to add to one of the master branches. Let's click here. And actually, it's quite quick. So you can see that it first checked out the source code from Git. It installs NuGet, it restores, it builds a solution. So if I made a mistake and the code no longer compiles, you will see it right away. Then it will run. Actually, it needs to publish a customization. We are testing this against a real Acumatica test instance. So it first needs to publish a customization. If for whatever reason the customization fails to publish, I will have an error message at this time. And while it's finishing, let me start Outlook because I want you to see the email that I will receive after this fails, because we do expect this to fail. So we are almost done here. And while that's publishing, I will answer the two questions that we have. Most recent one from Robert. Yes, I have figured out how to have the unit, the Acumatica unit UI test, sorry, from the test SDK to reside within a unit test. I have to use reflection to call something in the Acumatica test libraries, but it's not too complex. Take a look at my repo and make sure to look at UI test base. So this is where the magic happens. You'll see that I use reflection to call the selected browser property. Otherwise, this will not work. Okay, still publishing. It says logging out, so we should be done. And a question from Sean. Do you have to keep the code files in the customization project for this? The code files don't have to be in the customization project. In my case, the code files are part of Visual Studio. They are stored in Git. And in the customization project itself, I just have the DLL. Okay, final question from Patrick. Does Azure Pipelines have an instance of Acumatica running? Initially, I thought that I would need one, but the instance of Acumatica is running on a separate VM. You can use off-the-shelf build agents and simply call an Acumatica VM that's running in your own cloud. If you want, you can have Azure Pipelines call your own build agent from your own machine with whatever Acumatica configuration that you need. Okay, so just to recap, I have Azure Pipelines, I have my Acumatica VM for the UI testing, and then I have a build agent as well that I set up. But you can just have Azure Pipelines fully hosted and your Acumatica instance on a publicly accessible address. Okay, so this is done, and you can see that we have an error here. So this is not a green build, this is a red build because the unit test failed. I could actually scroll through and look at the log, okay, and it would show me which test failed. You can also do that in a more friendly way by looking at the test tab here. It will show you which test failed. You can click on it, and it tells you that the assertion failed. Okay, we did not receive an error message, even though we were expecting one. So you would see all the tests that failed in this window. And also, if you go to your email, maybe it's not in yet, or I've not set up email, but you do receive an email when the build succeeds. So you can see, well, actually, this is a successful build that I built earlier. Okay, so you get that, you get an error message as well when it fails. And if the build was successful, Azure will also save the build artifacts as part of the pipeline. So let's see here. Yeah, published. So you do have the ability to download the customization. So what you know is that this zip file here passed all your tests. Everything worked. You can take this and you can publish it yourself to a production instance of Acumatica because it passed the compilation rules. We do the same thing at Velixo. If I go to recent build, actually, if you want to see the extent of the pipeline, right here. Oh, this is a quick build. Let's take a more complete one. Yeah, 35 minutes. This one ran the full test suite. So you can see almost 2,000 tests here. They all passed. And in the script, you see all the different steps. And this is what I wanted to show you. The publish artifacts, you can actually have multiple files. So if for whatever reason you had to maintain multiple versions of the project for different Acumatica versions, you could also have all the artifacts as part of your pipeline. And you could even publish these artifacts elsewhere, like Acumatica does. and like we do with Velixo. So builds.velixo.com contains all the builds that we've made. They are all tied to an Azure pipeline. We can look at the exact revision in the source code, so it's a very, very convenient way for us to work. Since my test did not pass, I am not able to merge these changes. So the developer will need to go back, fix whatever was broken in the code, then push again before the test will pass. And once the test passed, they will be able to merge this into the main production branch or whatever branch that you have in your source code. You can take this to the next level by doing something called continuous deployment. After all the tests pass and everything, you could actually deploy this to production environment, maybe during a maintenance window. So you could say, let's say that every Monday at 3 a.m., you publish the latest approved version of your product. One thing that is really nice about Azure is that you can set up pipelines with multiple stages. I do have a screenshot here. So yeah, stages, dev, test, production. And you can do things like adding a timer or like querying your bug management system. So let's say you promote it to a staging environment, and then you have manual human QA people testing the customization, and then they will create bugs in Jira, in TFS, or in, I think there's Azure something now, but anyway, like in whatever you use to track bugs. You could set it up so that it will only promote that build to production if you have no open issues filed for this particular revision. So that can all be set. You can see here I have query work items highlighted. So that's an example. So you can have like very complex workflows that will not only do the integration, the deployment, also the final delivery in production. That's it. I hope that you enjoyed my session and that I have been able to demystify CI/CD a bit for you. Don't let anyone fool you. This is very hard. Coordinating many people, many developers working on many things and running them all at the same time is hard. Everything that I showed you today is on GitHub. I know it's a lot of content, a lot of code. I hope that I was able to explain things and that you understood everything here. I have a bunch of links that you will find extremely useful, all on my screen right now. Take a screenshot. I believe Mark will also be sharing this with you as well afterwards. There's a recording. I know that Robert also shared a vlog that he had about the Acumatica Test SDK. Yeah, well, actually, I have the video. It's a direct YouTube link, but there's also an Acumatica blog article that you can reference. I will put it in the chat window once more here. All good. And before I wrap up, I'd just like to plug Velixo, if I may. I'm doing a webinar on July 12th. Even if you don't care about Excel, there will be a professional magician, a guy that was featured on the Learning Channel and multiple magic shows. So he will be introducing us for this webinar. I'm launching the next version of my product. This is on July 12th at 1 p.m. Eastern. You can register. It's on YouTube as well. So it's live. But if you want to register in advance, just go to velixo.com/webinar. I think we have like 2 minutes. If there are any additional questions, I'm happy to stay on and answer your questions. If not, you have my contact info. Always happy to stay in touch with all of you.
All right. Thank you, Gabriel.
I see a few questions, Mark. That will like take like 2 minutes. Chris Hargrove, can you prevent the zip build if a test fails? Absolutely. The zip file is not attached here if the test fails. Patrick, is your build side part of the Azure pipeline system? The answer is no. This was set up. It's an Amazon S3 bucket that is exposed over HTTPS. And would you be able to post a link to the GitHub repo in the reply to this question? Yes, type answer. Let me do that right away. Here, and it will be in the chat window as well. In just a sec. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the conference. I know there's a lot of great presentations coming up, so I hope you stay on. And thanks a lot, Mark, and the entire Acumatica team for having me once again.
Thank you, Gabriel.